Hey guys, how's it going? So UFC 317 is this weekend and I'm going to run through the card and give you guys my picks and predictions for all of the fights. So let's just get straight into it. And opening up the early prelims, we have Christopher Ewert versus Jackson McVey. So Christopher Ewert debuting in the UFC with this card. He's filling in somewhat late notice for Cedric Demas, who I thought would have won the fight previously, but now we have Ewert here, and he is pretty impressive. He has a 7-0 record with his professional career, some really good performances as well, especially on promotions like Fury with some pretty tough competition, but once again, nothing like UFC level. Quite a few of his finishes are KOs, especially early in his fights. He has quite a few round 1 KOs, so he is very, very dangerous, especially with his hands. And he usually fights light heavyweight, so I think at middleweight he's going to be hitting harder on sort of weaker chins. His opponent Jackson McVey debuting in the UFC as well on this card, coming off an undefeated 6-0 record at smaller promotions, predominantly LFA, where he found most of his finishes sort of early within his fights. With a mix of both TKOs and submissions. He's very, very good on the ground as well. And I'm a bit torn with this matchup. It's kind of a 50-50 with me because these two fighters are coming in from smaller promotions. We don't really know how they're going to match up when it comes to the UFC skill level. And while Ewert is filling in on pretty short notice, he has been preparing for the Contender Series. So he's definitely been in training, and his knockouts that fill his record make me sort of concerned for McVey. But at the same time, McVey might sort of be too well rounded, might carry him through a win with his sort of grappling and wrestling, but I'm going to have to go with Christopher Ewert, and I'm going to say that's going to be by a round 2 KO. Next up on the early prelims is Jhonata Diniz versus Alvin Hines. So Jhonata Diniz had a really bad performance at UFC 309 where he was taking on Topuria in a fight where he got taken down very, very easily. In the first, he got taken down early in the round and just held on bottom position for the rest of the round. Didn't really make an effort to get up or just was really struggling to deal with the grappling. And then in the second round, he got taken down again, but this time he got absolutely battered on the ground with some massive ground and pound, predominantly the elbows that were cutting him open badly, and the fight actually had to be stopped by the doctors at the end of that second round. Topuria took that one in a pretty bad performance from Diniz. Before that, he actually had a decently impressive performance against Carl Williams, where he was allowed to stay on the feet for the whole fight and strike for the first 2 rounds, with him winning those first 2 rounds pretty clearly in the striking department. But in the third, Williams started implementing takedowns and wrestling, and he actually lost that third round through being sort of held down and taken down. And while his fight with Austin Lane did end with him landing a brutal left hook KO in the middle of the second round, Diniz was losing the first through being taken down and held on bottom position, which is a very common trend. He is a threat on the feet. He does have serious power in his shots, but he has horrendous takedown defense, and when he gets put on bottom position, he just kind of sits there and lets the round pass. And this has been an issue since his first fight in the UFC, that he hasn't really improved much throughout his career. So that is very, very worrying. His opponent, Alvin Hines, very impressive 7-0 record at LFA, while a lot of these came from finish. Emphasis on his submissions. He is really, really good on the ground, and is able to often lock in submissions there. But I don't know how well this will translate to UFC skill level. But this is a favourable matchup for Hines because his opponent lacks takedown defense, which is a pretty strong suit for Hines. When he can take his opponents down, he usually finds success. But also on the feet, he does actually put up a really good fight in most of his fights, takes some real damage, gives it out as well. And I either see this fight going one or 2 ways. I see Diniz landing strong on the chin of Hines and able to put him out early in the fight. Or more realistically to me, I see Hines able to get Diniz to the ground and ride it out to a decision, or even maybe find a submission. So I'm actually going to pick Alvin Hines for this one. I'm going to say that he's going to get a round 2 submission. And closing out the early prelims, we have Niko Price versus Jacobe Smith. So Niko Price coming off a really, really bad performance against Themba Gorimbo, where he got outmatched the whole fight. He was losing in the striking, getting outstruck by about 4 to 5 times the volume each round. And even got out-wrestled in all 3 rounds, with Gorimbo taking a very dominant 30-27 decision. Niko looked really bad in that. Before that, he had a contender for the worst fight of the year against Alex Morono at UFC 302, where sort of they were both throwing punches that had no impact the whole fight. They gassed out very early. It was really sloppy, scrappy, slow pace, but like not in a fun way scrappy. It was just sort of them throwing, knowing that they weren't able to knock each other out, but also they can't be knocked out. Price won that one, close decision, but once again, not a particularly good performance from either fighter that fight. And while he did win that fight, the fight before that against Robbie Lawler, in Lawler's retirement fight as well, may I add, he got absolutely starched 30 seconds into the fight, with Lawler landing this brutal uppercut in the clinch that absolutely folded Price, had him out bad. I just don't think Price is that good. His opponent, Jacobe Smith, only has one fight within the UFC where he debuted against Preston Parsons at the start of the year, and this fight was quick work for him. He beat up Parsons on the feet and then landed a brutal straight right directly on the chin of Parsons, had him out and down and out badly in the first round. Very impressive debut. I don't know if he won a bonus, I think he did. But yeah, very, very impressive performance from him. And I think Jacobe Smith will make easy work out of Niko Price, who I think is absolute cheeks. And if his last performance is anything to go by, I think Jacobe Smith will get it done by a knockout. So I'm going to go with Jacobe Smith, and I'm going to say he's going to get done by around 1 KO. Now moving on to the prelims, we start off with Terrance McKinney versus Viacheslav Borshchev. So Terrance McKinney, known as one of the most dangerous strikers in the UFC within the opening minutes of a fight, where he very often finds his finishes in these first rounds, like when he took on Brandon Moreau in a fight that lasted 20 seconds, with McKinney throwing everything he had in the opening seconds and landing a brutal knee right on the chin of Moreau, had him out cold. But this pace has sort of a double-edged sword effect to it, with people who are willing to sort of stand there and bang with him, usually using it as a way to find their own finishes. Esteban Ribovic did this. He wasn't really afraid of a gunfight. He never really is. And in their fight, he pushed McKinney back up against the cage and then landed a kick to the head that put him out cold. This was all within 40 seconds of the fight. McKinney just tried to finish him, but sort of exerted himself a bit too hard and got caught. And since then, it actually appears that McKinney has worked on his pacing a little bit. He paced himself a lot more. His most recent fight with Damir Hadzovic was probably one of the most patient performances we've seen out of McKinney so far, with a surprising amount of takedowns and wrestling. McKinney ultimately allowed himself to take the back through his wrestling in this one, and then once he took the back, he managed to find a first round ground and pound finish. So he still is very, very dangerous, but he isn't really coming out with reckless abandon anymore. His opponent, Viacheslav Borshchev, coming off a decision loss to Tom Nolan at UFC 312, in a fight where Nolan took the first 2 rounds through making it competitive in the striking, but mainly just dominating in the ground game, with him almost submitting Borshchev multiple times, while Borshchev arguably only won the third, but couldn't really do enough to take that decision. Before that, he had an insanely close split decision win over James Lontop, where the whole fight they were going tit for tat in the striking, with only one real decisive round being 2, which was for Borshchev. He definitely won that one, but even then, the fight was nothing really crazy from either fighter to make a statement for any of the rounds, so it was very, very close. And while he is very solid on the feet, his ground game isn't great, and he very often can be taken down without much struggle. With his fight against Chase Hooper, he got absolutely dominated on the ground. Chase sort of had very ease when taking him to the ground. He landed some big ground and pound as well, and even knocked Borshchev down in the first round before finishing the fight in the second via a ninja choke. So he got dominated by Hooper in that fight, and while I think Borshchev is very good on the feet, he has a glaring issue in his grappling and takedown defense when taking on skilled grapplers. And I think McKinney has been working on that sort of area of his game, and he's a lot more comfortable on the ground, and I think that will prove a challenge for Borshchev. So for that reason, I'm actually going to go with Terrance McKinney by around 1 KO. Moving on, we have Viviane Araujo versus Tracy Cortez. So Viviane Araujo coming off a win over Karine Silva at UFC 309, where she lost the first round through getting outstruck by Silva. An area where she's not the best, but in the second and third, she mixed in a lot of grappling and takedowns and took that fight back, winning the last 2 rounds with her sort of dominance on the ground whenever the fight would get there. Ultimately took a unanimous decision for that one in a pretty low volume, not that insane pace fight. Before that, she lost to Natalia Silva, who is very, very good, and I think will soon be fighting for a title, so not the worst of opponents to lose to. And in that fight, she was keeping it competitive with her takedowns and wrestling, but was also getting denied when trying to take Silva down, and got beat up in the strike in the second and third badly. Lost that unanimous decision. She did have a very close fight with Jennifer Maia, where she was winning the first and second, doing better on the feet and dominating on the ground in the second, but she struggled in the third, sort of let Maia take over the fight in the third, getting out wrestled, but ultimately she did take the decision win. Her opponent, Tracy Cortez, most recently went 5 rounds with Rose Namajunas in a late minute fill-in for Macy Barber. And to her credit, she did make it close at some points, with her slowly getting better as the fight went on, but she got knocked down in the first round, and from there she just lost the first 4 rounds through getting beat up on the feet. And even on the ground, she kind of got dominated for a good portion of the fight. She lost that one 49-46. There were moments where she looked like she was going to come back, but she just couldn't overcome what Rose was throwing at her. Before that, she beat Jasmine Jasudavicius, who I actually think is a really good opponent. I think that's one of her best wins to date. And she beat her on the feet for rounds 1 and 3, but got dominated in the second when Jasudavicius started implementing some of her takedowns and her grappling, which is her strongest area by far, and I don't know why she didn't implement more of it in the first and third. But ultimately, Cortez took that decision, and while it's usually her striking that sort of carries her through fights, she is pretty impressive in the wrestling. She demonstrated that against Melissa Gatto, where most of the fight was spent on the ground, and she actually won the first and third through reversing positions and landing some good ground and pound. She lost the second through being taken down and held on bottom, but outside of that, she was reversing, landing ground and pound, trying to make her way back up to the feet. But she took that one by a pretty clear decision, and I think this will be a very, very close fight due to both fighters being able to really hold their own in every area, with Cortez likely doing a bit better in the striking and Araujo sort of surpassing her in the grappling and wrestling. But ultimately, I think Cortez is more well-rounded and sort of will be good enough to fight Araujo in all of these areas, and will likely outstrike her way to a decision victory. So I'm going to say that Tracy Cortez is going to take this one by a decision. And next up is Hyder Amil versus Jose Delgado. So Hyder Amil came into the UFC with an amazing performance in his debut, where he beat up on Fernie Garcia badly for the whole fight. He knocked him down the first and almost submitted him multiple times as well in that first round. His grappling looked pretty good there as well. And in the second, he backed him up against the cage, finished him via standing TKO, where he was just pounding away at his head, had him out badly on the feet, and the ref jumped in, stopped it, second round TKO in his debut. And this wasn't a one-off performance. His second fight in the UFC against Junyoung Lee, he stood in the middle and fought for the center, and landed a 30-piece combo or something around there on Lee, which backed him up against the cage, where he was just taking shots to the head without sort of defending himself. He bent over a little bit, kept getting sort of jabbed straight, hook to the head. The ref jumped in, stopped it. Another standing TKO for Amil within the UFC. He did have a pretty close fight recently with William Gomez, where that went to a split decision that I thought Amil would have won unanimously, with 2 and 3 I thought were pretty clear for him. He was landing more, he was landing harder. He had Gomez pretty hurt at many points during the later half of the fight. Gomez did win the first, he looked a lot better on the feet, but either way, it went to a split decision and Amil took it. His opponent, Jose Delgado, only one fight within the UFC, where he debuted against Conor Matthews, who isn't the best of opponents. But in this fight, he landed heavy on Matthews. He landed a really nasty overhand, knocked him down, and then jumped on him, followed up with some ground and pound, and put him out in the first round. But this is against Conor Matthews, 0-3 in the UFC, and he's been finished in all 3 of his fights, and by some pretty average competition. He got knocked out by Dennis Bazooka, who isn't really a finisher, but yeah. And while I think both these fighters are really good, and they're both sort of promising up-and-coming prospects in the division, I can't trust a win over Conor Matthews over sort of the resume that Hyder Amil's built up so far. I think he's just fought tougher competition and made it look a lot easier. And I think Amil will be a lot faster on the feet, a lot sharper on the feet, and just the better of the two when it comes to the striking. So I'm going to go with Hyder Amil by round 2 KO. And closing out the prelims, we have Jack Hermansson versus Gregory Rodrigues. So Jack Hermansson, most recently coming over a win over Joe Pyfer, one of the most powerful strikers in the UFC, with one of the best comebacks in that fight. Pyfer was winning the first 2 rounds by landing the bigger shots, while Hermansson sort of stayed out of range, wasn't really risking much because he didn't want to get clipped by those big power shots. And then in the third round, Hermansson starts entering the pocket a lot more, trading. He knows it's down 2 rounds, so he actually starts trading in these exchanges and sort of ducking out of the way whenever Pyfer would throw these heavy shots. And as the fight went on, he was actually beating up on Pyfer. In the 5th round, he took him down as well, scoring some extra points there. But yeah, he completely came back in that one, won the last 3 rounds throughout striking Pyfer surprisingly, and got a crazy comeback decision win there. Before that, he took on Roman Delitze in a fight where leading up to the finish, he was winning very dominantly. He was beating up on Delitze on the feet, as well as taking him down and controlling him there for the first 2 rounds. But at the end of the second round, he actually manages to give up its back to Delitze, who starts raining down ground and pound from back control, finishes the fight via a TKO, but it was kind of tricky because Hermansson was winning that prior to the finish. Outside of a few losses though, Hermansson is very, very solid. He won his fight against Chris Curtis and just showed how dominant he can be, with that whole fight sort of staying on the feet. And in the striking battles, Hermansson was absolutely dominating. Chris arguably won the 3rd round, but outside of that, he was getting outperformed badly on the feet, with Hermansson taking a decision win for that one quite dominantly. His opponent, Gregory Rodrigues, coming off a pretty bad loss to Jared Cannonier, where in the first round, he looked like he was actually going to finish Cannonier early. He was knocking him down. He'd knocked him down twice that round, was winning the round very, very convincingly in the striking. But after the first round, the tide of the fight completely changed, with Cannonier beating up on Rodrigues in the second. He knocked him down the third, and then eventually actually put him away in the fourth when he got him up against the cage, landed a nasty left hook, and then followed up with some ground and pound to win that fight. Before that, he had a pretty uneventful fight against Christian Leroy Duncan at UFC 304, where Rodrigues showed off his wrestling. He was taking Duncan down every round and holding him on bottom position for a large proportion of the fight, but he didn't really do much outside of that. And while he is very well rounded, his striking is often his best weapon, with him beating up on Brad Tavares the whole time when they fought, with some takedowns and wrestling to really secure those rounds. And in the third, he managed to get a standing TKO against the fence. So he is well rounded, but I think his striking will be his best weapon. And while I think Rodrigues is very, very good in all areas and dangerous if you let him stay on the feet, I think Hermansson's just going to be too technical. I think he's a way, way more technical fighter than Rodrigues, and he has dealt with a lot of harder hitters than Rodrigues. I mean, he fought Joe Pyfer, and he does have a really good chin. He didn't get knocked out by really anyone. If anything, he's going to get TKO'd. And in this fight, I see him slowly outperforming Rodrigues as the fight goes on. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Jack Hermansson by a decision win here. And now we're into the main card. And starting off the main card is Payton Talbott versus Felipe Lima. So Talbott, at a time, was actually seen as one of the biggest prospects in the bantamweight division. A lot of people were comparing him to Sean O'Malley, with his name being known by the general audience, especially after he beat up on Cameron Simon, who was a prospect in himself at the time. And in that fight, he landed a perfectly placed counter left that dropped Simon. He jumped on him, finished him with ground and pound in the second round. And while it was sort of close in the first round, that second round, Talbott really showed how dangerous he can be on the feet. And in his fight against Yanis Gamori, it only further solidified this surging prospect, landing clean on Gamori almost instantly in that fight, dropping him and having him half out, and then finished him via TKO 20 seconds into their fight at UFC 313. And when it seemed like Talbott was on his way to being a top 15 opponent, he took on Raoni Barcelos and got absolutely fraud checked. He had a serious lack of takedown defense and wrestling, which I don't know how long back it stemmed, but Barcelos really exposed it. He took all 3 rounds just by taking Talbott down, from which he just wasn't able to get back up again to the feet, where he would be winning, but there was never really a moment where he got to let anything off on the feet, and the fight just ran away from him on the ground. Lost that one by a decision in a pretty bad performance. His opponent, Felipe Lima, debuted in the UFC against Muhammad Naimov in a fight that was pretty close in the first and second round, with Lima winning on the feet for most of the time. Naimov was making it competitive in the first with a takedown and some wrestling, and very early in the third, Lima took Naimov down, and when he got his back against the cage, he sort of took back control and submitted Naimov with a rear naked choke a minute into that round. So it was a pretty impressive performance to debut in. Following that, he took on Miles Johns, who was a very skilled striker with some serious power in his hands. But in this fight, Lima absolutely beat up on Johns for all 3 rounds, with Johns resorting to takedowns in the second, but still really couldn't take any of the rounds back. And this fight just showed some serious improvement from Lima in all areas. And while I don't think Talbott is over or trash following his loss to Barcelos, a lot of people are saying this Barcelos loss has really fraud checked him and he's never going to be what he was. I do sort of think his lack of wrestling, though, will throughout his career be a bit of an issue. You can't really learn high level wrestling within sort of a year period. And I just see Felipe Lima being a lot too well rounded. While I think Talbott will actually be better on the feet and possesses a bit more power than Lima, I think Lima's going to be able to mix it up a lot more and will present way more of a wrestling threat in this fight. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Felipe Lima by a decision win. Next up on the card is Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van. So this was originally meant to be Brandon Royval versus Beneil Cap. Cap had to pull out. He got a foot injury or a toe injury. I think he broke his foot. And Joshua Van stepped up pretty much a few days after 316, so he has had a bit of time to train for this. But yeah, Brandon Royval, absolute dominant force within the division, with his second fight against Alexandra Pantoja being a complete scrap on the feet. Royval was putting up a really competitive fight on the feet, ultimately beating Pantoja on the feet for most of the fight. But ultimately it came down to Pantoja's wrestling, which Royval was having a huge amount of trouble dealing with. Pantoja would take him down easily, hold him on the ground, and run out the decision. Ultimately, Royval lost that one pretty badly by a decision. I think it was 50-45 or something around that. Following that loss, he bounced back against Brandon Moreno, who at the time was the #1 contender, in a fight where Royval was once again winning on the feet. Moreno did have some moments early in the fight, but ultimately only really found success in his wrestling, and in the end it went to a pretty competitive split decision with some really weird scorecards. But Royval took that one. I thought it was pretty clear that Royval won, but I do get how you can make an argument. And Royval's just been scrapping it out with the top of the division since his last title shot. His last fight was against Tatsuro Taira, where he beat up on Taira on the feet pretty badly, with the third and fifth being complete beatdowns. Taira was putting up a bit of competition with some really impressive grappling, but in the end it went to a split decision. Royval took the first, third and fifth round. I thought it was a lot more dominant towards Royval in this fight as well, but once again I could see the arguments. And he took away Taira's undefeated streak in this fight. So yeah, he's been fighting very, very dominant competitors in these most recent fights he's had. Joshua Van fought most recently at UFC 316 against Bruno Silva in a fight where he absolutely dominated Silva on the feet. He knocked him down once in the first, then twice in the second, and while Silva was trying to sort of take him down most of the fight, Van would just deny anything. He has really, really good takedown defense, and showed it in this fight. And then in the third, Van got Silva up against the cage. He dropped him with a body shot, I think it was, like a kick to the body or a punch to the body. Silva slouched down, and then Van jumped in, finished him with ground and pound in the third round. And while he has found a finish recently, he is definitely more of a volume fighter. He chooses to beat up on his opponents for all 3 rounds. Like was the case with Cody Durden, he absolutely beat down on him for the whole sort of fight. Won a very dominant 30-27 decision, and that was when they fought at 310. And while he does have an amazing record within the UFC, he does have one loss that is really worrying, and that's against Charles Johnson, where Van was really struggling to deal with the height and reach of Johnson. I think Johnson was about like 3-4 inches higher. And ultimately it just led to him being outstruck in the first. He was coming back in the second. I'd actually say he won the second round. But ultimately it was early in the third where Johnson landed an uppercut on Van that dropped him and had him out badly. And while I think Van is really, really good and belongs with the best of the division, I think he's going to struggle badly with the height and reach advantage that Royval has. And he is turning around quite quickly after going 3 whole rounds from Bruno Silva, where he did take a decent bit of damage. So while I think Van is definitely a very worthy opponent, I think he has it in him to get it done this fight. I think more likely what we're going to see is Royval's height and reach being a bit too much for him, where he's really going to struggle to deal with that. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Brandon Royval by a decision win. Next up, we have Beneil Dariush versus Renato Moicano. So Beneil Dariush had an incredible win streak between 2020 and 2022, with an 8-fight win streak that was capped off with Mateusz Gamrot, who is a pretty tricky opponent to get through. And I think in this fight, Dariush took all 3 rounds through beating up Gamrot on the feet, while defending most of his takedowns, with the second and third rounds being particularly dominant, with a knockdown in the third almost finishing Gamrot. Ultimately, he took that one by a decision. But since that, he hasn't had the best of performances, but admittedly these are against sort of the top contenders of the division, with his fight after Gamrot being against Charles Oliveira, who's incredibly dangerous in all areas of the fight, and especially early in his fights. And to Dariush's credit, he was actually making it really competitive in the grappling, an area where Charles usually finds light work. But late in the first round, he got backed up against the cage and clipped with a nasty right hook that dropped him, with Oliveira finishing the fight via ground and pound shortly after to get a TKO victory in the first round. And following that, he got finished again within the first round when he took on Arman Tsarukyan, who once again is a very dangerous fighter. He's very well rounded and he's currently a top contender. But in this fight, Dariush didn't really get to do much. He got caught with a brutal knee straight down the middle very early in that fight. Dropped badly. I think he got followed up with ground and pound, but it wasn't really necessary because he was out badly. And he got finished a minute into that fight, so pretty unimpressive performances from him as of recent. Renato Moicano was supposed to fight Beneil Dariush at 311, but due to Sarukian pulling out last minute, he got moved up to the main event against Islam Makhachev. Not easy money. At the time, Makhachev, he still is #1 pound for pound. This was on 1 day's notice, and predictably, he got submitted late in the first round with a Darce choke, but he was making it competitive early in the fight. In fact, on the feet, I'd say he was actually winning. He was bringing the fight to Makhachev on the feet. He even sort of kind of knocked him down. It was weird. He hit him and threw him off balance, but I think it actually did do a bit of damage to Makhachev. But ultimately, Makhachev took him down and very easily found the Darce choke. Before that, he had a pretty big upset win over Benoit Saint-Denis, where he absolutely demolished him, with the first round being a complete 10-8. Moicano took top position and just started causing some insane damage to the face of Saint-Denis with some elbows. Before sort of pacing out the second one, staying on the back foot, jabbing at his face, which he did lose the second round, but the doctors jumped in, stopped the fight after the second round. He took that one via doctor's stoppage. And Moicano's biggest weapon is his top control, and when he is on top, he can often find some really mean ground and pound. It was the case with the Jalen Turner fight that ended late in the second round, where Moicano got top position and finished Turner with a barrage of punches from top, finding a finish via ground and pound TKO in the second round, and this was following him losing the first quite dominantly. He got dropped pretty badly by Turner, to which he just stood up again while Turner sort of walked off thinking he could get a walk-off KO there, and he weathered the storm, came back in the second, took him down and finished him. And while I think a lot of people are sleeping on how dangerous Dariush can be on the feet and how good his wrestling is, I think Moicano is incredibly skilled at dealing with dangerous strikers. He fought Benoit, who at the time everyone thought had one punch knockout power, and I think he will actually deal some big damage himself if Dariush lets him take top position. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Renato Moicano by around 3 KO. Now on to the co-main event and the first of 2 title fights. We have Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai Kara-France. So Alexandre Pantoja, one of the most underrated fighters in my opinion in UFC history. He has a resume that covers almost all of the top contenders at his weight division, and he has a legacy at flyweight that is only beaten by Demetrius Johnson. I think he's the second best flyweight in UFC history, and he's shown his dominance recently against Kaya Sakura at UFC 310, where he beat up on him, took him down in the first, absolutely dominated that round, and then in the second he quickly took the back and submitted him via a rear naked choke very early in that round. In a fight that just showed the skill difference between sort of these regional scenes and the UFC, but also how dominant Pantoja is as a champ. He did face a lot of resistance when he took on Steve Erceg at 301, with each fighter being 2 apiece going into the 5th. Pantoja won the 1st and 3rd through his takedowns, and while Erceg won the 2nd and 4th in the striking, landing some big elbows that did some really big damage to Pantoja. It actually cut him open, and I've never seen Pantoja that hurt. And in the 5th, Erceg attempted a takedown. Pantoja reversed it, losing that 5th round clearly for Erceg. Went to the decision. Pantoja took it 3 rounds to 2. Very, very close on. A lot of people did actually argue that Erceg did enough in that 3rd round to win it. But it was very, very close, and I'm not going to argue with that win. Outside of that performance, though, Pantoja usually dominates his opponents with complete control, especially in the grappling. That's what usually wins him his fights, like the case when he fought Brandon Royval for the 2nd time at UFC 296, where on the feet he was actually getting beaten up pretty badly, but the minute he found a takedown or managed to get Brandon Royval down, he just had complete control. He'd take the back even while Royval was standing, keep some threatening submissions, won that one by a 50-45 decision. His opponent Kai Kara-France, one of the hardest hitters in the flyweight division, with him demonstrating that recently over Steve Erceg at UFC 305, where he beat up on him on the feet the whole fight, and then in the 1st round he dropped him badly at the center of the octagon. Erceg got back up, backed up against the cage, but then got dropped again, this time probably worse, where the ref jumped in, finished it via a KO in the 1st round. Before that, he had a pretty close fight with Amir Albazi, but in that fight, the judges' scorecards were all over the place, and KKF got robbed. I'm just going to say how it is. Albazi only was winning the 3rd round objectively, and maybe the 2nd, but once again, I thought that one was way too close to judge as well. But outside of that, KKF absolutely outclassed Albazi on the feet, but lost that 1-2 split decision regardless, even though it wasn't really. The fourth round was definitely KKF's, and the fact that one of the judges didn't score it from is crazy. And while Albazi loss was a bit of a fluke, his loss against Brandon Moreno before that was not. That was a fight where he was actually doing really good in the first. Started to slow down a bit in the second though. Moreno started to pick it up a little bit in the second. And then Moreno in the third dropped him badly with a kick to the body where he jumped on top, followed up with TKO, ground and pound, finished that fight in the third. And while KKF is incredibly powerful with his hands and can put people out with relative ease if he lands cleanly, this is really only a threat near the start of the fight, maybe the first 2 rounds. Granted, he can outstrike you in the later rounds, but he's not going to put you out cold in sort of the 3rd, 4th or 5th round. And I think Pantoja will be able to sort of out-wrestle his way through that. I think he has a very underrated chin as well. He has taken some serious punishment and not even looked dazed, so I don't think anything Kara France can throw late in the fight will be able to put him down and out. And I think more likely we're going to see him weather the storm of KKF striking and using his grappling and wrestling to take his way to a win. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Pantoja by a decision win. And now on to the main event. Ilia Topuria takes on Charles Oliveira for the now vacant lightweight championship of the world. Ilia Topuria, he's on a run in the UFC to be one of the greatest of all time, and he's currently just had an amazing career at featherweight. He took out some of the biggest names within that division, with him getting a title shot through beating Josh Emmett in a fight where he beat up on Emmett badly for every minute of that fight. Round 4 was especially dominant. He scored 2 10-8s on the judges' scorecards, and one judge even gave him a 10-7, which is really, you don't see that often, especially without a point deduction for the other side. Getting a 10-7 is a clear beatdown. Almost finishing him multiple times, and in the end he took a very clear decision win for that, fight of the night bonus, and it eventually got him a title shot at UFC 298 where he took on Alexander Volkanovski for the featherweight title, in a fight that a lot of people, including myself, were actually thinking would be too much for him. Volkanovski is an all-time great. He's been one of the most dominant champions within the UFC. And while Volk was winning that first round, to everyone's shock in the second round, Ilia got Volk up against the cage and threw a combination that ended with a right hook that landed clean on the chin of Volk, put him out badly, put him to sleep badly. And like that, Ilia was now the featherweight champion of the world. And in his first defense against Max Holloway, there was a lot of doubt in the air. Holloway was coming off an insane upset knockout over Gaethje at UFC 300 in one of the best fights in UFC history, and he made himself undeniable for that featherweight shot. And also at the time, a lot of people were calling Volkanovski washed. They were sort of diminishing Ilia's win over Volk, saying that it wasn't the same Volk we saw, that Volk's gone downhill and this was the last good performance we'll see from him. I didn't really agree, but there was that sort of talk surrounding the fight, and the real question was, would Topuria be able to crack the best chin in the UFC in Max Holloway? And when the fight happened, the first 2 rounds were pretty competitive. I said Topuria won them, especially the first through his wrestling. But in the 3rd round, he hits Max with this really hard shot over the top, dazes him, has Max stumbling backwards a little bit, and then he gets him up against the cage where he lands that same sort of combo like of hooks and jabs to the body, and then landing over the top with a brutal right hook and completely knocks Max out. He shattered the unbreakable chin of Max Holloway, being the first person in UFC history to knock him out. In fact, I think he's the first person in UFC history to even knock Max down. Getting a 3rd round KO over Max Holloway in his first defense, and it was an incredible performance. His opponent, Charles Oliveira, his next lightweight champion with a title run that included the biggest names in the division. I mean, I'm talking wins over Michael Chandler, wins over Dustin Poirier, and he closed out with the win over Justin Gaethje in a fight that a lot of people thought Gaethje had too much power for Oliveira. He was going to put him out cold. But it was complete domination from Oliveira, not just in the wrestling, but also in the striking, with him knocking Gaethje down midway through the first round, and securing the back to lock in a rear naked choke and submit Gaethje very early in that fight, securing a second defense of the belt. However, as of recent, he has lost his belt, and he did, and while he did beat Beneil Dariush, when he went up against Armin Tsarukyan at UFC 300, it went to a really close split decision that Tsarukyan took. In some people's eyes, they called it a bit of a robbery. I kind of agree, but once again, it's so close that I'm not mad that they gave it to Tsarukyan. But it was so close, it was hard to tell. But the first round was very dominant Oliveira round. He almost submitted Tsarukyan very early in the fight with a guillotine choke. But Tsarukyan took back the second, landed some massive damage on Oliveira, cut him open with some elbows. And when it got to the third, it was really, really close. Oliveira presented more of a submission threat, while Tsarukyan was doing a bit more damage. But in the end, Tsarukyan took that one. But after that, he actually kind of bounced back in his second fight against Michael Chandler at UFC 309, where Oliveira was beating up on Chandler on the feet for the whole 4 rounds to start the fight. He was beating up on him badly, hurting Chandler badly, having him sort of backing up and running away, taking him down every round as well, and almost submitting him in the 3rd and 4th. There was a moment in the 5th where Chandler sort of got the back of Oliveira and started landing these about 20 hammer fists to the back of Oliveira's head that went unanswered from the ref. Had Oliveira in some real danger there. Oliveira was sort of eating these shots without having a way to defend himself, but he survived, went to a decision. Oliveira took an insanely dominant 49-46 decision where he looked amazing in all facets of the game. He looked good on the feet, he looked good on the ground, and while I think Oliveira is one of the best fighters in the UFC in terms of his ability to mix it up and thrive in every area of a fight, and he also is my favorite UFC fighter as well, so there is that. I have doubted Ilya too many times in the past, and every time without fail, he has done what I think he couldn't do. He beat the dominant champion Volk, he cracked the unbreakable chin of Holloway, and while I do fear he is going to slightly struggle with this new weight class, I mean, moving up weight is sort of putting yourself at a massive disadvantage, and Charles is a lot, not only bigger, but taller, has a bigger reach advantage, which I also think he'll struggle with. I can't deny that he is one of the best in the UFC and will likely find a way to get it done. So while my heart says that Oliveira is going to win this, and I really, really want Oliveira to win this, my head's telling me that Topuria is going to somehow find a way to get this done. So I have to say that I'm going to go with Ilia Topuria by round 3 knockout. So that's it, guys. That was UFC 317 and all my predictions for the card. Right now on the screen are a compilation of all of my predictions, all of Cam's predictions. I can't believe I didn't pick Oliveira for this main event. Like, it kills me not to, but man, Topuria is so good. I mean, I can deny it as much as possible, but the facts are there. I'm hoping I'm wrong, but yeah, when it comes around, we'll see if I'm right or not. Yeah, this card is amazing. I actually picked quite a few underdogs this card as well, so hopefully that does pay off. I mean, they're not like massive underdogs, but still. Yeah, so I'm very excited to watch this one this weekend, and I'll see you for my breakdown video at the end of the week. Bye bye.